My name is Trip Gorman, and in this episode of Semilla.VC, I sat down with Alexa Clark Ibarra, associate at Magma Partners. This episode is part of a new Semilla.VC series titled Future Partners, highlighting the insight we can derive from rising stars in the Latin American VC ecosystem. Before joining Magma over 3 years ago as an analyst, Alexa worked at Rampa after spending 4 years spearheading development at Hackers and Founders. In this episode, we discussed Magma's unique media efforts through their podcasts and LatamList, how Magma does portfolio support differently, insight into the differences between what an analyst, senior analyst, and associate do in a Latin American VC fund, and how Magma is betting on underrepresented founders. We discussed all this and more in this episode of Semilla.VC. Alexa, could you start by telling the audience a bit more about your work history up to and including your current role at Magma Partners?
Sure. So I studied international relations in college. I initially wanted to work either on the Ministry of Foreign Relations or something in the public service. I actually did internships in both places. On a consulate in Shanghai and at a public campaign of a candidate in my hometown. But even though I enjoyed a lot and met amazing people, I realized those weren't the places where I wanted to develop or where I could make a bigger impact. That's not to say there's people that don't achieve that in there. There is, but it just wasn't like a fit for me. After both experiences, I worked at a program for startups in Guadalajara, Mexico, where I'm based. And I spent like 2 months more in an internship role. And I wore many hats, including like office management, more on the admin side, but also the community side to bring more knowledge about the program. It was called Hackers and Founders. And then I became more involved with portfolio support, scouting of startups. And that piece has where I've been focused for the past 4 to 5 years of my career. And now I'm at Magma Partners, which is an early stage VC fund focused in Latin America. And I've been here for over 3 years, started out as an analyst and senior analyst, and now I'm an associate.
Amazing. I was similar to you, kind of disenfranchised with government and working in government for short periods of time because, deep down, someone who's interested in tech is just not meant to be working in government. I want to know more about Magma Partners, what you guys do differently, and really that whole arc of why someone should seek out funding from Magma Partners.
Sure. So I guess we do differently a couple of things. I'll start with the platform of services we offer to entrepreneurs in the portfolio, but that we can also sell to entrepreneurs or companies outside of Magma. These include PR and marketing services, media, and dev support, to name a few. So that's one piece. We also have this amazing head of human capital, which supports both Magma and the companies. Like he supports with recruiting talent for Magma, but also with best practices and attract the correct talent for the portfolio companies. And also, this is relatively new, like started back in this year, I think, or late 2021. But we're trying to develop like a Magma standard in terms of storytelling and pitch deck. We think it's like the lead domino to attract either talent for the startup, but also fundraising and even drive sales. So we want to help every founder that joins the portfolio to really have a very an amazing pitch deck and storytelling. And where I'm gonna focus right now, like that's more on the support side. But what we also do differently, I would say, is we try to invest in any type of background in regards to the founders. Like we'll have the founder that came from an Ivy League school or from successful startup in Latin America. But we've also will invest in the founder that maybe doesn't have those connections or that didn't went to like an Ivy League school. And so we try to support like any type of background, basically. And also I would say, I can't recall the numbers, but we also have like a really good number of women founders, which I guess it's like an outlier for not only LATAM, but I guess across the globe. We do have like a very strong portfolio of female founders and even solo female founders. So yeah, those are a few of the things. Sorry, I'm gonna actually add one more, and that's in regards to what we call the underestimated founders, which are these founders that maybe didn't come from like an amazing college or have worked at an successful early stage startup. And so what we've seen is this phenomenon of founders that have, I don't know, this set of credentials, raising more venture capital, even with like a pitch deck, which isn't wrong, right? But we've also seen that there's founders that have, I don't know, really good traction, but don't have maybe the credentials that makes certain VCs be more feel more safe about investing in them. And so we are trying to support, we're trying to develop like this playbook of what can these underestimated founders do to raise venture capital successfully.
I love it. I'm going to switch gears into a fun question. You live in Guadalajara. Tell us more about living there. Tell us about the tech scene. Tell us about the venture capital. And then also, I think you can maybe weave this into your answer. Because you started working with hackers and founders so far back, how has it changed in the last couple of years?
Sure. So there's a really great ecosystem in the city. Prior to COVID, I guess, we had like a bunch of different events in town every week. It was really like vibrant. I guess after COVID, that has slowed down a lot, but still there's a ton of companies that I think sometimes are a bit overlooked just by not being on the main cities. And I do think there's a really big pool of talent in Guadalajara. Like, cost, I won't say like it's cheap, but it is like cheaper than other cities. I don't know, like Mexico City or Sao Paulo, I guess, or other like really other of the main hubs. So there are a few characteristics that I would say make it a really great place for startups to start their companies, basically, or recruit talent in the city. We've seen a bunch of startups build their tech teams within Guadalajara, and there's this quote, or a bunch of people make fun of it, and it's because a couple of people from Guadalajara would say that it is the Mexican Silicon Valley, which I think it should be just Guadalajara, like a really great hub, right? It doesn't have to replicate or try to replicate like Silicon Valley. I think that would be silly, but that's also, the name is not just because of the startup scene, but it goes way back from when I think it were the silicon chips, or I don't remember. There was like this component that companies from Silicon Valley would develop in Guadalajara. And I don't know, a bunch of companies like IBM or HP would have and still have like really big offices within the city. And I think that also pushes for Guadalajara to have like a really big tech pool of talent.
I love it. I want to talk more about your role and how your role has changed during your time at Magma Partners. I think a lot of us you can find content, you can find partners speaking about kind of what their roles are. But I think what's lacking, especially in Latin America, is insight into what the different, like the associate role is. What does that mean? What does the analyst role mean? What does the senior analyst role mean? So I think that's what this podcast is helping cast a little bit of a light on. Because we have you here, Alexa, could you tell us about how your role changed between being an analyst versus senior analyst and now associate at Magma?
Sure. So first, I'm going to say that I think this can vary from fund to fund, like each has their own strategy. In my experience at Magma, for example, when I initially joined, and everybody who joins the investment team at Magma, your main task, at least for the first couple of months, is going to be to be in charge of the inbound channel, which is our application online for startups that want to apply for funding, and which is open 24/7. Like that was the main task, to make sure we were answering back to all of these startups, that we were giving them feedback and jumping on calls, which those ones we thought made the more sense for the fund, and also scaling those to the other to an associate or to the partners if it was the case. As I developed more, I started to become more involved with supporting portfolio companies, and also even bringing some referrals into Magma. And I guess that was kind of when I made the jump into senior analyst, like making more, doing more of the support to portfolio companies. But also we were scaling as an organization, so becoming more involved in those internal processes that we needed to develop to be able to support more portfolio companies, but also to help bring up to speed the new talent at Magma. And now, as an associate, I get to I overview some of the analysts at Magma, and also I get to see and bring more deals to the table, and also lead more of those conversations with the startups. Even during this journey from analyst to senior analyst to an associate, you get, I guess, to develop those skills of negotiating more with the startups and having a bigger say in those decisions, right? And also there's, of course, stuff in the administration of a fund that you need to, that I also help with. And yeah, I guess it's a bunch of portfolio support, and also help Magma be more scalable as an organization, I guess.
Thank you for giving us that overview of the different positions. Now I want to hear a little bit about your roles pre-analyst at Magma. Could you tell us a little bit more about what Hackers and Founders did, what you did there, and how that kind of rolled into your current role at Magma?
For sure. So I joined Hackers and Founders back in 2015. A cousin of mine had brought the Hackers and Founders community into Guadalajara, which were these events, these monthly events in which we would bring a speaker in startups or in tech to talk to the community about what was a startup, how startups worked, and basically just learn about startups, because there wasn't a lot of knowledge, especially back in 2012 or 2013, about startups in Latin America, or at least there wasn't many stuff that was available. And we thought also the local component of seeing somebody that was already being successful in startups would help people be wanted to do this, right? And so that was the first piece, the community part of it. But then we opened up a program, a small program for startups, mainly from Guadalajara, to support them basically with like the basics of, I don't know, how should you be constituted, and like which should be like your main KPIs, how should you track them, and a bunch of investment readiness, like how should they prepare to fundraise venture capital. And so we did that. And also a couple other things we did through Hackers and Founders here in Guadalajara was that there wasn't like, we would prepare the startups to be ready for fundraising, but there weren't many funds or even angel investors investing. So actually one of the things we did back then was we brought a couple of angel investors or people working in VC funds in Silicon Valley. Like we brought them to Guadalajara to tell people in the city or high net worth individuals or family offices, like why should they invest in startups, because our startups needed it, the ecosystem needed it. And so that was also a couple of the initiatives we did back then. And after Hackers and Founders, we were about to launch a program called Rampa, focusing startups in Latin America. But in the midst of that, we basically, as Rampa, joined Magma Partners. And this was like 3 years ago, more or less.
Thank you for that additional information. I want to hear more about you. You mentioned portfolio support during your current role at Magma. Can you share with the audience a story about a portfolio company of Magma's that you've worked with and why you believe in them, and how Magma helped, and you know, a whole package story about that?
For sure. I'm gonna deviate a bit on the support part of it, but I think this was like a great experience for me, like throughout Magma, but also I'll go right into it. So there was this insurtech which we talked with in 2021, like in March, during March of or April of 2021. And back then we gave them like a very straight feedback on why we weren't going to invest in. But we told them, hey, like send us your updates, let's stay in touch and see if in the future it makes more sense. I think a ton of startups, when we give that feedback, like ignore it and say like, okay, like this door is already closed, so I'm not gonna pursue it. But this particular insurtech, they reached out, I think it was like 6 to 8 months afterwards, with like a very exciting update. And I say like, hey, maybe this makes more sense with our thesis now. And so I jumped on a call and I was on the conversations and negotiations to actually invest in it. So it has been like a great experience to see like we passed initially, but they proved or did improve some of their initial thesis. So they changed the model a bit. And so they listening to the customers and to their market and making these changes. And luckily, it made sense for how we thought about this particular model. And also a very exciting thing is that I've been working closely with them this past year. And they actually showed me some of their projections for the end of this year back in July, I think. And I was like, okay, this is like very ambitious. Let's like don't burn too much capital, don't go crazy, and let's see what happens. I thought it was super ambitious, but actually they did achieve it, and like keeping it super lean. So it's been an amazing surprise, just this part of we passed initially, but eventually we did invest, and now that they're like over achieving these expectations. So super happy.
Indeed. How could you not be? I'd love to know, go to a broad question, go to a fun broad question. What are you most excited about right now?
I guess it's to prove part of our thesis of underestimated founders in regards to that making this type of bets does make sense. I guess you do have to build like this playbook for them to develop, especially the recruiting and fundraising skills they need. But I'm happy about us at Magma on keep on developing this playbook, and also outside of Magma. I know there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm excited about seeing more women in leadership positions. There's, for example, in 500 LATAM, Damaris and Regina, who were just promoted to partners. And so seeing women in these leadership positions, but also more women founding companies or being like C-levels and executives in startups. So there's a lot of work still to be done, but I'm excited about these like baby steps that I'm seeing in the ecosystem.
I want to ask two more questions. First, how has Latin American venture capital and tech changed during your career? And you mentioned you kind of had to talk with high net worth individuals in Guadalajara and like explain not even just to invest in a specific startup, but the whole value proposition of like investing in a startup at all. So especially that kind of like LP dealing with them in the early stages. I'd love to hear a story or a little bit of your insight about that.
Sure. So back when I started working with startups, I don't remember the exact number of VC funding in 2015, but for example, this Q3 of 2022, I think it was, according to Labka or somebody else, I think it was $1.1 billion, which is less than what was poured like in 2021, but it's still like 8 times more of what was being deployed in 2015, right? So there's that to start with. But also there's, and I guess this is nothing new, but founders coming from these from these startups that are having success in Latin America. I don't know, you have the ones that come from Rappi or Nubank or many others companies that are doing really great. So you have that. You have more people coming and founding startups. I do think, while it's not perfect yet, but I do think that there's more information available for founders that want to start their companies. Like, for example, maybe in 2015, you had no clue about what should be the best legal structure for your startup, not right? And so there's those pieces. And also, it has been interesting that we had like this peak of, we had like a really big jump in VC funding like throughout the past 6 years. Now it has slowed down a bit maybe, but during this like really big jump and the bonanza, I guess, in VC funding in LATAM, you also saw like many tourist capital coming to the region, right? And so I think that has now left, unless you are like unless you have like a specific thesis for Latin America, right? Of why you believed in the region. I also did see like a couple, I guess, of tourist founders that maybe since we had this capital, that so much capital coming into the region, like, hey, maybe I'm gonna start a company in this like hot sector because it's the cool thing to do, without like this, I don't know, like strong skin in the game, or yeah, like why or like that being like their a really big purpose on their careers, right? So I think we saw the incoming of like tourist capital and a couple of tourist founders into the regions, but I think that's gonna be harder from now onwards.
Amazing. So finally, I have to ask Peter Thiel's famous contrarian question, but with uniquely Semilla.VC twist. What important truth about Mexico or Latin America do very few people agree with you on?
I don't know if very few people agree with this, but I think there aren't many solutions yet, or the right like infrastructure for many companies to truly target or focus on like the, how should I call it, not like the middle class, but like the people that are maybe in the limit range of the poverty line. I think there's a couple, but I think there's still very few. And I'm not saying that it's because because people don't want to solve these problems, but I do think like to target these specific sectors, there's also like a bunch of work to be done, like on the government or policy side, basically. And there isn't to say that it's bad for solutions to be built for the middle class. Of course, it's not. It's like a really huge driver for the local the economies to develop. But yeah, I think it's still really hard to build solutions targeted or focus on like people in poverty or in this limit and of like vulnerability that can go into the poverty line. I hope that made sense.
It absolutely does. Alexa, thank you so much for coming on the Semilla.VC podcast today. I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you, Trip, for the invite. It was amazing.
Thank you for watching this episode of Semilla.VC. My name is Trip Gorman. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you view the podcast. And don't forget to check out our newsletter, Dealflow LA, which can be found by going to dealflow.la.